So today we are joined by two amazing human beings who are here to talk about harm reduction. And so I'm going to just turn it over to our tech team to be able to show this video. Again, if you want to use that Q&A feature, you're more than welcome to do so. I will make sure to transfer the questions and send them on to our presenters. Or again, if you would like to email me at the invitation that you received, I will be sure to forward those questions. And so I'm going to turn it over to tech support to show the video. Thank you all for joining us today.
So thank you, Ellie and the UCC, for inviting us to host this conversation series, Families Matter, Family Matters. This has been a conversation that we have continued to hear from many of you across the UCC as we endeavor to come alongside and companion with our congregations and communities as they navigate the ongoing impact of the war on people who use drugs, the stigmatization and moralization of substance use, and its very significant impact on the souls and spirits of our beloved UCC family. In this way, the title points not only to the nuclear family or to the families of choice we have created, but our church as a family as well. People building community together with love, justice, and spirit at the core. So our hope today is to be able to be in conversation with the language surrounding substance use and considerations for shaping extravagant welcome for all people, and specifically shaping extravagant welcome for people who use drugs and people who love people who use drugs. So speaking of soul, and in keeping with the way I have seen many of the Nurture of the Soul series webinars start, let me ask by beginning with a question, and that is to share who you are and how it is with your soul today.
I guess that's coming to me.
Yes.
Good morning, Erica. And my soul is hurting. Yeah, I'm Dee-Dee Stout. I'm here in Emeryville, California, which everyone doesn't think they know, but they do, because we are the home of Pixar Studios, a very tiny community. I think we're not even technically a city at 12,000 people, nestled between Oakland, Berkeley, and San Francisco. And it feels a little bit protected in a way. You know, we're protected from the weather, we got protected from the fires, we're protected from a lot of the social issues surrounding us and surrounding all of us, but it doesn't mean it doesn't hurt us.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
And for folks who don't know me, my name is Reverend Erica Poellot, and I'm the Minister of Harm Reduction and Overdose Prevention Ministries for the national setting of the United Church of Christ. I also serve as the Executive Director of Faith and Harm Reduction. We are a national nonprofit, which is co-creating a justice movement which connects people who use drugs, people who do sex work, and communities of faith through the development of harm reduction-centered spiritual resources, ritual support, and spiritual care. We are blessed that our organization operates out of and has deep roots at Judson Memorial Church here in New York City, which is where I'm calling in from. And how it is with my soul, Dee-Dee, sadly, mine is the same. My soul is quite heavy this week, though a bit lighter at getting to gather with you. This week, we lost a really significant harm reduction movement leader, friend, family member of mine, whose name was Louise Vincent. So I am centering myself in her honor for this conversation, a conversation she was deeply passionate about, recognizing the power of language and its impact on individual and collective wellness and social justice. So in talking about kind of the power of language as I shift us towards the meat of this conversation, I want to share a piece that my friend, colleague, Reverend Sarah Howell, wrote for the foundational toolkit that both HROP and Faith and Harm Reduction use. And it's a section on language and reducing stigma. And she says this: "And God said, let there be." This is how creation happens in the Abrahamic faiths, not as a meticulous engineering project, nor a work of magic, but entirely spoken into being. The word not only communicates the divine intention, it actively accomplishes it. A word created the world. Our words, too, create worlds. Words spoken harshly or carelessly may create a world that is unsafe for someone who is struggling, who is sensitive. Derogatory language, whether used intentionally or unintentionally, can construct a space that may be unwelcoming. Many common phrases used to talk about people who use drugs and people who do sex work imply stigma, judgment, and shame. This is easy to understand in overtly derogatory instances like the use of terms such as junkie, crackhead, etc. But language matters in much more subtle ways and can reveal assumptions about a person or their substance use that may be unfair, inaccurate, and harmful. I'm going to add my own kind of thought that how we talk about and the language we use to understand the issues have very real implications for how we collectively address the issue. If we understand substance use to be a criminal legal issue, then it makes sense that incarceration and law enforcement are the strategies we turn to for remediation. If we understand substance use to exist across a spectrum, including recreational use, substance use disorder, dependence, and many points between and beyond, then we turn to an equally expansive spectrum of wellness strategies to support individual flourishing, including safer use education, risk minimization, medication for substance use disorder, housing first, and a variety of other healing strategies. If we understand substance use and substance use disorder to be a complex bio, psycho, spiritual issue, then we meet one another in a similarly shaped space, a space which recognizes the wholeness of who we are, which foregrounds our humanity, our dignity, and worth, and leans in with curiosity, compassion, and connection about the many intersectional issues that shape an individual's relationship with substances, such as race, gender, sexual orientation, class, and much more. And I just want to pause before I turn it over to Dee-Dee, which is just to note that these conversations can elicit painful or strong feelings. And I want to say often, especially for those of us who have lived or living experience of substance use, our own or a loved one's. So I want to offer an invitation to each of us to also enter this conversation with curiosity, compassion for ourselves and others, and with the intent of deepening connection. So Dee-Dee, a little bit.
Well said.
Thank you so much. So why this conversation and how does it intersect with the work that you do?
And thanks, Erica. I realized that in my introduction, that's how distracted I am this morning, that I did not give any of my background, which might be helpful to why I'm here. So I have a master's in health counseling for special populations. Those special pops are indeed people who use substances or engage in other risky behaviors. And, oodles of training beyond that. I've tried to see if I could change all of that into one PhD, but they've said no. So I'm stuck with just the master's. But I have nearly 40 years of my life spent in this world in one form or another, starting out as a former chaotic drug user for 20 years, morphing into someone who went to work for the place where I went through treatment, which was what you did back in the 80s and 90s, and fully getting on board with the disease concept, with the war on drugs, with the whole issues that we see still here today, and finding that it was killing me to work in that environment. So I'd like to think at times, and some people have thought, that I've come to harm reduction because it's this, glowing object over here that, drew me to it. It's like, no, this was survival. This was, I can't work like this anymore. And I know I need to do this work. So how do I do it? Mm-hmm. And I'm very grateful to have found Dr. William Miller, who developed and has written the book on motivational interviewing. And that, along with Alan Marlatt, who wrote both the books on harm reduction and on relapse prevention, were my two big mentors in helping me to find another way to work that not only helped people more efficiently and more kindly, shall we say, with more compassion, but also myself. Yeah. And I think sometimes that gets missed in these conversations. The toll that being the police state And I have nothing against, well, I have some things against police, but I have family members who are cops. So, you know, they do serve a purpose, and I'm glad they're there. But I didn't sign up for that. That is not the role that I wanted to take, and I was part of that for at least a dozen years, and I really hurt people.
Mm. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. You also we can mention your book, which also was an incredible, I think, touch point for many of us who share the same history you do. Myself, coming out of very traditional abstinence-based recovery spaces, also experiencing the kind of stigma and soul death and spirit death that a lot of the environment and culture was projecting back on me.
Mhm.
That's endeavored to really kind of step into this space and was introduced to harm reduction. I was not a ready convert. I think that may be actually what I said in your book when we talked. But that it's been a really significant personal and professional and spiritual journey getting to this point, and that the language that we use has been a really kind of root bed of a lot of those considerations. So I'm glad we have the opportunity to be in conversation about this today. So
Me too.
Why don't I read the words, the list
Well, before you do that, let me add just one more piece if I could.
Great.
So just to get back to, you know, why am I doing this with the UCC? Well, the UCC is the church of my youth.
Great.
I am going to cry. If it weren't for Glenn Bauman, who is my minister at the United Church of Christ in Midland, Michigan, and my parents were kind of some of the early members of that church, I would not be here. You know, he was the one who, when I was using substances as a very young person, I started at 12, and I was still very active in the church. Even my parents didn't want me to be a part of the church anymore. I was teaching Sunday school, and they thought that was inappropriate, being a drug user. And he said, no, this is where she belongs. So, sorry. And that is why I'm doing this for the UCC.
Yeah.
It's part of giving back.
Thank you.
I hope it's helpful.
Yeah, thank you so much for that.
Yeah, I knew this was coming this morning.
Yeah. We do belong, and that's why this conversation is so important.
Yes.
Why I hear colleagues across the UCC really asking for help in wrestling with language such that we don't inadvertently, you know, limit or stigmatize or harm or convey the message that people are less worthy of welcome than others are based on what they put in their bodies, how they deal with pain, and a whole range of other things. So,
absolutely.
yeah. You and I came up with a couple words, and I will read those out. And then why don't you and I kind of be in conversation about those words and definitions and the ways that those have shown up for both of us in the various spaces that we find ourselves in.
That's great.
So the first word is addiction. Second word is recovery. Third word is codependency. Fourth word is enabling. Fifth set of words is tough love. And the last is harm reduction. So I am going to let you take the lead. Why don't we start with addiction?
So addiction, and I was just reading my social media last night and again this morning, as I do most mornings, and it is definitely one that is polarizing for many people. Lots of folks, particularly in the harm reduction communities, don't want us using the word addiction because of the root of that word being addict. And that's a word that we definitely don't want to use. And let's just say for the record that if someone wants to call themselves a junkie, a crackhead, an addict, a lover, whatever the word is, they are free to call themselves anything they want. We are not the language police here. However, as a culture, we need to move away from that. You know, the latest PSA on people who use fentanyl, for instance, illicit fentanyl, was just horrific. It was back to the old days of it was methamphetamine in the 90s of, you know, the scabbing and the lost teeth and the gaunt look. And it's not like that can't happen. Absolutely. But that is not the typical person. who is using or having some sort of less healthy relationship to a substance. Addiction, I like to use because it also encompasses all risky behaviors. It's not just about substances. And there are far more issues in other areas of risky behavior than just the substance use, even though particularly in our culture, we tend to focus on the substances and then on only particular substances.
Yeah, that makes really
yeah,
critical.
go
And
ahead.
I'm also hearing you say you're using the word, you're saying substance use. And, I have to admit, I struggle with using the word addiction just because it has been conflated and deeply connected with all sorts of stigmatizing. And as you're saying, really pathologized ways of being in relationship with substance use. And again, only specific substances, not all substances, not the ones that those of us can, legally drink.
Legally use,
and all of this.
yeah.
But also with all the other words that kind of get conjured, connected to, so we're talking about substance use. Most people are talking about substance abuse. They're talking about disease. You talked about kind of a transition in understanding, substance use and shifting from this disease model to understanding it in this kind of different, more holistic way.
So substance abuse is a term that we don't use professionally anymore, and that I would like to erase in the culture because it correlates and puts on an even playing field abuse to people and to animals with an inert object being a drug. And while drugs are powerful, they don't yet have sentience. So until that happens, I think we need to stop doing that because and you and I have had this conversation, but if people can understand putting that all on an even playing field is morally wrong. Being a person who survived a lot of interpersonal violence, and that is not okay. That is very much different than someone who is perhaps overusing some drug. We'll just put it that way. It's not a term that I particularly like, but we'll just describe it that way. So substance use, and just to be clear, substance use and substance use disorder are also very different. As you and I know, but probably most of the audience doesn't know, most people who use substances never developed a substance use disorder. Up to 85% of people. And I don't care what drug we're talking about. It's a little bit trickier with things like fentanyl, illicit fentanyl, because of the other illicit ingredients that wind up being in there are so dangerous. But it generally holds as far as developing a substance use disorder. So treating substance use is not something that I'm interested in. I want to treat substance use disorder. And I don't quantify that, even though there's a book behind me that will do that for me called the DSM-5. Gratefully, I don't diagnose people. I'm in the state of California, not legally allowed to do that. So what I do is pull it out and read the qualifications, if you will, and ask a person to define it for themselves. Does that sound like you? Or which one of these sounds like you? And go from there. So my work is slightly different here in private practice than it would be if I were in a treatment facility or a rehab, we might call it.
Sure. Well, this kind of leads very seamlessly into our next word, and and one of the kind of pieces you just raised. And so the next word is recovery. And so thinking about the just multiplicity of ways that recovery is defined, and yet there has been kind of a singular or dominant narrative about what recovery or authentic recovery or California recovery looks like, right? And so I'd love to hear you talk about recovery.
Thanks. The way that I describe it sometimes is as traditional recovery. To be as neutral as I can be about that. And I do strive most of the time to be neutral. We'll get to one of my words that I'm not neutral at all about here quickly. But I do try that because this is about conversation and curiosity. And that really does need to be the bottom line for me. As a professor, that's also very important to me, that I bring that to the classroom most of the time. So with recovery, it has traditionally been abstinence based and abstinence only. And so what's happened is that it's become a word that gets interchanged with abstinence. And many of us in the last 20 years or so have said, well, maybe that's not quite accurate. I mean, who gets to decide? And I go back to even the co-founder of Alcoholics Anonymous, Bill Wilson, when he wanted to write in that the requirement for membership was a sincere desire to stop alcohol, to stop drinking. And it was Dr. Bob, his co-founder, that said, well, who's going to determine who's sincere? Get that out of there, Bill. It's not going to work. And I think, that's what we should be looking at and saying, this is up to the individual. And in the 80s, when I was early in my traditional recovery of abstinence, it was psychiatric medications that everybody railed against. Well, you can't call yourself sober if you're taking Prozac, that sort of thing. And today it's around things like Suboxone and buprenorphine, or pain medications, opiate pain medications, or a variety of other things. It's like, first of all, again, back to AA, they have a pamphlet on this, AA member and other medications or something like that. And it's been around for decades. It's brilliant. And it pretty much says, you know what, that's between you and your doctor, your medical doctor. And we in these rooms do not play doctor. So the central office, the sort of head of AA, is saying, we don't get involved in that because that's a personal issue between a medical professional and a patient. And yet, if you go to many meetings, not all, but many of them, you're going to hear people say things like, well, you're not really sober if you disclose that you're on, for instance, for me, on opiate pain medication. That really bothers me. And it's a big problem. So when we look at recovery, the way that many people look at it, in fact, I got the definitions from our governments. They haven't changed it yet. Recovery, according to SAMHSA and the National Institute for Drug Abuse, recovery is a process of change through which people improve their health and wellness, live self-directed lives, and strive to reach their full potential. Even people with severe and chronic substance use disorders can, with help, overcome their illness and regain health and social function. Even NIAAA, which is the alcohol side, and don't ask me for the rest of the acronym, says recovery is a process through which an individual pursues both remission from alcohol use disorder and cessation from heavy drinking. So they're really quantifying it. So technically, I could still be drinking as long as it was moderate. And we know that not everyone, but many people who develop an alcohol use disorder can, in time, learn to moderate if that's what they choose to do. So in both of these, we're not seeing a lot of focus on drug use. And alcohol is a drug, folks. So I'm just using the term drug use. Yeah. And I find that really fascinating.
Well, it is fascinating. And it's also the implications of kind of the ways that we have come as a culture to define recovery as being abstinent from all mind-altering substances, you know, talking about coffee and cigarettes, all those kind of things.
Right. Sugar.
A whole nother thing, right? But that it's, thinking about the, what happens to families who are involved in family court systems. And if the definition of recovery, according to courts and legality, is that a parent is not using any substances, and that is what equates recovery, then we have families being torn apart across the country unnecessarily. We have people incarcerated, re-incarcerated on parole violations for substance use when it may not be a substance that was particularly problematic for them. And while they may have, again, as you made, reference to all these other changes towards wellness and increasing health and, all these pieces. So it's a really significant term.
It is. And, when we look at substances too, we have to look at what the court's going to look at. So the first thing that flashed in my head when you were talking was to look at tobacco. Nobody has their family torn apart because they're still smoking tobacco, even though smoking causes far more deaths. Nearly 500,000 Americans die from cigarette smoking related causes. Alcohol is the next highest at about 150. You look at heroin, it's about 50,000. But what is it that tears apart families? It's those drugs over here, not these, that are actually killing people in far greater numbers. So again, this is where the language becomes so important, right? And we appreciate the stigma that comes with that language. So when I was a single parent, it was not okay for me to continue to use cocaine, but it was okay for me to continue to drink and use cigarettes with my young child.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a problem.
It is definitely a problem.
And this next word is one that so often gets also wrapped up in all these recovery conversations. And again, kind of in some of the kind of more familiar recovery spaces, such as 12-step spaces. And that is the term codependency. What about that?
Yes, this is one of mine. In the book, I called the next three words the three most hated words, I think, in the addiction world. My three most hated, something along those lines, because they've done more damage than I think a lot of drug use has, and that's saying something. Codependency is a word that came out of a couple of different places, but we think of it culturally coming from Melody Beattie's book in, I think it was 1985, was the year that Codependent No More came out. And it was earth-shattering, groundbreaking. I mean, it was phenomenal, the effect that it had on our industry. And it, at its time, I think was important. We needed to take a look at how families and how others can affect the drug user. And I'm just going to say drug user, by the way, and not go into chaotic and problematic, but just that's what we're speaking of. And people taking a look at their own behaviors within that family was crucially important to where we need to be today. My favorite person who talked about this in a very different way was John Bradshaw, the late John Bradshaw now, who, if any of you were around in the 80s and 90s, you would have seen him all over public broadcasting. And he talked about the disease of addiction, but looking at it holistically, so at the family and the individual, and didn't use the word disease to mean an illness. He called it dis-ease. And I love that we're all in this dis-ease, this discomfort of what's happening. And you have one person over here who is solving, for the moment at least, that issue through the use of substances. And if we understand that as well, then it makes no sense to penalize that person any further, to cause them more harm and pain, thinking that that's going to cause them to stop. It's actually going to cause them to use more, because now they're just in more pain. And sometimes there'll be a family member who's also a substance user. And again, not necessarily a problematic one, that they are using substances. And so that also gets complicated. Can I have a glass of wine with dinner with you who are not drinking now? Those kinds of things. So codependency in the book has 11 pages of symptoms.
Wow.
Which is why it never made it into the DSM.
Okay.
You cannot have 11 pages of diagnostic criteria that you have to go through, because I can put every person on this planet in that category through this. And that's the problem that I have with it. It has also become shorthand. And since I'm training the next generation of either addiction counselors or therapists, I don't want them using shorthand. I want them asking the question. So if someone says that they're codependent, I like to ask, so what does that mean for you? What does that look like? Because again, with 11 pages of criteria, I have a picture in my head that could be very different from what you mean. One of the issues that I have with the term too is that it also is very, I'm going to call it waspy, to use an older term. That's the white Anglo-Saxon folks, for those of you that don't know that term. It's coming from a place of saying, I need to have boundaries that are firm, and I need to think about me, and not all this is bad, right? Let's not get into a binary here. And I need to not help you so much that it hurts me. Well, being a member of the UCC since I was 13, I believe, and having grown up in it, that goes right against what my church teaches. No, you do give until it hurts. Sometimes, not necessarily all the time, but that is not a problem behavior. That's seen as a very Christ-like behavior, right? So how do I merge those things? That causes a lot of what we might call cognitive dissonance, right? That itchiness that says, wait a minute, this isn't fitting for me. But I have some outside person telling me that what I'm doing is wrong, so I better change it.
Yeah, I think about how it has just been really, weaponized against, I feel like, largely people who parent and largely people who are women and all of this, and that we really have, I like the correlation you drew between your experience in the UCC and our theology, and that, yes, isn't care about coming alongside and companioning with and sharing in people's pain, right? But instead, we have said that families and loved ones who endeavor to do that, and at what level, like who determines, like when it crosses this line. Apparently, there's 11 pages in a book that will give us a little guidance, but really, again, pathologizes our attempt to love one another and care for one another.
And we know in many marginalized communities, people of color, sex workers, pick your category, those communities are going to care for one another to the point of hurting each other, or, hurting themselves in trying to care for someone else, because there's no one else that's going to step in and do that. So that is part of their culture.
Well, I think we've talked about that too as part of kind of production culture, right? We learned how to take care of ourselves in the absence of, and think about mutual aid organizations like 12-Step. We found ways to build community, which was healing and fostered connection and fostered growth and all of this. And so, yes, we have,
Yeah. The other thing that I'm just going to point out, and that'll lead into some of the next terms, is I think that codependency is very anti-love. And I think that's at the core of what's always made it itchy for me. And love is exactly what we need more of. And what the church talks about us needing to have for others, to encourage the growth of, to be that Christ-like instrument on this planet, that we love more, not less.
So maybe we should number the terms. And why don't we lean into tough love?
Recently read that piece that I sent to you too, of maybe what we should do with tough love is switch the order of the words and talk about loving tough. And that does fit right into it. How do we love more and hate less? How do we get out of these binaries that we are so stuck in? How do we love someone? And if it fits for you, how do I love other people in a way that is not harmful to me? That's okay. We can all love to our own extent. One of the things that I talked about in the second edition of the book was, that we need to decide as families and friends, what we can live with when it comes to people that we love that clearly also love substances. How do we balance that? And saying, so it might be for someone, it might be, I can't have you in my home when you're under the influence because I don't know what you're doing in the bathroom and I have other children here. And because of legality issues, that could be an issue where I'm just uncomfortable with it.
Mhm.
But I can meet you for lunch at a restaurant.
Yep.
And I don't care if you're under the influence. If that's the way you show up, all I care about is that you show up.
Mhm.
And we're not going to have that conversation. We're going to talk about other things. So we kind of make that agreement. And that's one of the ways that I work with families to try to help them to expand their thinking on what they can do and what they can live with versus what they're not supposed to do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say, because so much of it gets focused on, totally going to lose my train of thought right here.
It's okay.
Maybe Ellie can cut this part out.
It gets focused on.
Oh gosh. Oh, Dee-Dee.
So I was talking about what families can do, expanding that versus what they can't do or shouldn't do.
Well, that it gets so focused on kind of particular behaviors and particular forms of harm. And it's not to say that we are minimizing or saying that, having an understanding about what you are able to live with isn't important, because it really is, but that it has been a very lopsided kind of phrase and conversation. And I've heard some people say quite succinctly that tough love isn't love. And I think that's
I agree.
I think that's pretty accurate.
Yeah, it's not. And it's not love for anyone. Sadly, the person whose name escapes me right now, but he was a parenting expert, as I recall. And I want to say it was in do you remember 70s or 80s that he developed this word, this phrase, tough love. And what he meant by that was that it was sometimes tough to love some of the people that we do love, but we need to love them anyway. And he has written that his own phrase, his own idea has been totally usurped and co-opted into this other thing. And he's aghast at that. That is not at all what he meant. And I think that's an important piece to add too.
No, I think it is about how we can aid the necessity of self-reflection and our ability to do that, and fostering ways to continue to keep connection alive while people are struggling, that we're not moving. Disconnection is not going to get us where we want to go. And so often
that's right.
That has been the I think mandate of tough love has been this disconnection, this cutting folks off. And there, as you're saying, that there's a myriad of ways that we can kind of support people in developing care systems.
That's right. For me, when I'm working with families, especially sometimes in couples too, it will be, yes, I understand that you want to throw them out. That, that's what I've been told I should do, is throw them out. And I always say, you can do that. Absolutely. There are two rules about that. One, if you make a threat, you have to follow through with it. Absolutely have to. Because if you don't, I'm going to learn you don't really mean what you're saying. And I'm going to push those boundaries, because that's what we do as humans, not as a drug addict, as a human. So be prepared. And second of all, how about that's the last idea, not the first one? Let's look for some other things that you can try first. And there's oodles of other things. And that's what I think always surprises people, that, again, our culture doesn't talk very much about other things that could be tried. We only talk about that. Oh, they're using, tough love, throw them out, make them hit bottom.
Yeah.
And today, gratefully, too many families and friends and loved ones are not willing to let people hit bottom, because today it means death.
Yeah.
I mean, it did back in my day too, but not quite as often as it is now.
Yeah.
And that's something most families can't live with.
Yep. Yes. 100%. And so that connects with the word that I moved out of its place, because we'll be touching on love, and that is enabling. Talk to me about enabling.
Yeah, that's my favorite word. So I am a proud enabler. What I enable is hope and knowledge and accurate information to the best of my ability. Enabling has, again, been co-opted to mean this bad thing. And sure, it can be a negative piece as well. We see enabling in our country today on a monumental level of misinformation. That is a negative side of enabling. However, there are lots of examples of positive enabling too. Yeah, I'm very grateful for my wonderful education at San Francisco State University, and the boundaries that were pushed there for me to cause me to think differently, or to at least consider thinking differently. That is what enabling can do. And again, back to, as an educator, that's exactly what I want to do. It's my job to push those boundaries.
Yeah. Yeah, I think about a couple really concrete expressions of the way that I have heard enabling used and the way that it has been enacted in policy. I think about folks who have talked about, I think it was Ohio for a period of time, I don't know if they still do, had laws on how many times first responders, EMS, could respond to an overdose by the same person. Because in that way, weren't we enabling people just to continue to use willy-nilly and recklessly? And yet, isn't that enabling life? That's enabling life.
That would be what
people.
I'd say.
You're enabling access here. You're
Yeah.
enabling, and people also talk about that specifically with naloxone and
with needles.
Yes, that it is
another one.
enabling rather than it is enabling health. It is enabling breathing. It is enabling ensuring that somebody, or increasing the chance that somebody is not contracting some sort of illness, which is going to greatly compromise their quality of life moving forward.
That's right. That's right. And maybe it also is enabling the possibility that they make a different decision the next time.
Yeah.
Even if they don't stop using, and I don't really care about that, but maybe they learn to use safer, or they use less, or they use it in a different way, or they switch drugs and use something that's legal instead of illegal. I mean, any of those things can be a great step towards better health. Yeah,
agreed.
Yeah.
Well, this kind of leads us into our last term, and I feel like this term is important in this moment, kind of where we are culturally, and for folks maybe seeing one of the recent executive orders where President Trump talked about so-called harm reduction and wanting to remove that and disallow any sorts of federal funding for harm reduction efforts, which do include naloxone and overdose prevention and a whole range of other interventions that are evidence-based and have decades and decades of kind of information about the value of. But I think it's because that there are so many myths and misconceptions about what harm reduction is and what it means and what it looks like in practice and action. And so I don't know if you have any kind of thoughts on harm reduction as a kind of.
Oh, I have so many thoughts on that, and on the myths, and I talk about some of those both in the book and a lot of talks that I do. This idea that harm reduction is sort of open season. Anybody can do anything that they want to. And it's like, well, first of all, technically, at least so far, people are supposed to be able to do whatever they want, as long as they're not hurting somebody else in the process, right? I can shoot myself in the foot with a gun. That's okay, but I can't shoot you in the foot with a gun, to be very dramatic about it. But harm reduction has, to me, three distinct kind of areas of it. We have harm reduction, that's the outreach that we call the Narcan and needles. Those are the folks that help people alive. And that is crucially important, because as much as I'm not fond of this phrase, for our purposes, I'm going to use it. Dead people can't recover. They can't make different choices. That choice is gone. So, and no one deserves to die because they're putting a substance in their body. Nobody, and I don't care what the substance is, they don't deserve that. So that's one piece. And then we have the policy and advocacy piece, the people who advocate and want to change laws and work within states. I'm thinking of your husband, for one, that does a lot of that work. And then we have people like me that practice harm reduction psychotherapy in some form or another. And we provide harm reduction treatment, and people don't even know that exists. They think it's only mostly the first part, the outreach, the clean needles and the Narcan. And it's like that, yeah, that's a piece of it. But we are interested in change. We are interested in helping people have better lives. It may not look like how you think their lives should be, or I think their life should be. Sure, I'm human too, but it will be better than it is today. And that's all any of these organizations that we read their definition of recovery, that's really what it talks about, is being better, is being healthier in some way. And harm reduction, so harm reduction, one of the big myths is that abstinence is the opposite. It's like, no, 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 no. And so harm reduction very much includes abstinence. You know, that for some of us is the ultimate harm reduction. It's just that we don't force it on people.
Yeah.
And by the way, those three distinctions of different kinds of harm reduction are not in silos.
No.
You know, that people move freely through in and out of them and practice all the above sometimes.
Well, no, exactly. And that goes right back to kind of where we began this conversation, which is recognizing the kind of intersectionality of substance use, and that substance use is not happening in a vacuum. People don't exist in vacuums. We have people who are embodied in particular cultures and bodies and societies and all of this. And so harm reduction, kind of as I have experienced it, is an opportunity to hold all those facets up for consideration when we're thinking about opportunities to move people towards kind of visions for what flourishing might look like for their own selves, right? And so we're talking about self-direction, we're talking about dignity, we're talking about free will, we're talking about community, we're talking about connection, we're talking about justice, we're talking about oppression, and recognizing how many of our folks and ways that marginalization deepens the harm for some folks who use drugs versus others. And so being able to hold that complexity, and I think is a really kind of valuable piece, and really kind
Absolutely.
of reduction.
I mean, you're talking, Erica, about critical thinking.
Yeah.
Is what it comes down to for me. And I remember my son back when he was in college calling me one day, it's like 19, so it's been decades ago now, and said, why don't we teach critical thinking anymore? He was in a lot of philosophy courses. He was an art major. And I had to say, you're right. We don't. And today, even more so.
Yeah.
You know, critical thinking is not what anyone wants us to be doing.
Yeah.
And it's crucial that we do that. And this is one of the places.
Yeah. And the stigma is so powerful. And we recognize that that is what really shuts this conversation down over and over again.
That's right.
Makes something like harm reduction, makes something, you know, like, anyways, all these other kind of ways of thinking about kind of healing for folks who are wanting to change their relationship with substances to very, very narrow opportunities. And so
that's right.
The harm reduction is really, just incredible opportunity and expansive opportunity for connection and welcome.
Yeah. I think we really at this point need to also think about this idea that, and let people know, most people who chaotically or problematically use substances do not want that kind of relationship with a substance. That was never the intention. Nobody starts out saying, I want to grow up to have an addiction. And that is not what happens. And going along with that, that those of us who use drugs or have used drugs, the drug was the solution for us. Even if it was temporarily a solution or a solution, not the solution, it helped us. You know, I like to say to my clients sometimes who come in who want to change their relationship to a substance is we need to first give thanks to that drug for keeping you alive to get you here. Because without it, you probably couldn't have survived the trauma. Now, it's unfortunate that now it's causing you more problems. And so let's take a look at that. And what would you like to do with all of this? And they're always surprised that I say that. because that goes against the culture of all drug use is bad. And of course, we know that's not true because we use more coffee and sugar in this country than any other country all
True.
put together. So, and those are clearly mood altering, try it, right? So again, remembering that not all drug users are problematically using drugs, so don't let the drama get to you if you're a family or a clergy or anyone involved there. And remember that most people don't want to be there. But punishment and shame is not going to help the situation at all. It will, I guarantee, make it worse.
There are many ways we can come alongside our folks with love and with compassion. And I know that that is some of what we are going to be diving into the remainder of this series. So I want to thank you.
And I should add that harm reduction is also very much invested in reality.
Yes.
It's pragmatic. So we're also not suggesting that you ignore the drug use or the problems associated with it. Yep. I think that's another myth that gets caught up in.
Yeah, I think you're right. Yeah, I think you're right. Well, I want to thank you so much for this initial conversation, and I'm going to extend invitation for folks to join us for part 2, which is happening next week, and we will have 2 special guests joining us for that. We're going to be asking a number of questions, including how can we support our loved ones without enabling their drug use, or does that even really matter? And we're going to invite you to join us as we take a deep dive into the many options that families have today beyond the traditional intervention that not only is rarely effective, but often has lasting negative effects, which can devastate families sometimes forever. So we're going to lean into love and healing and opportunity and connection. And we invite you all to join us in that. See you next week.
Thank you for this rich conversation. I cannot wait for the next 2 conversations. And I love that I still see the chat going on. Somebody did put a question into the Q&A, and I will be sure to forward that to Erica. If you would like a direct reply back to them, please put your email into the Q&A, and or you can email me that question and I'll be sure to send it through. I want to thank you all for joining us for this webinar today and for sitting in on a pre-recorded session. It was a last-minute decision. Something had come up, but we are grateful to Erica and Dee-Dee for being flexible and for our tech team to make sure that today and all of the days that we have this happen. So thank you for joining us. Thank you for crowdsourcing in the chat, sharing your emoticons, for your questions. Again, thank you to our tech and media team for helping to make this possible. And we look forward to our next webinar, which is going to be on Monday. So Monday, we have a special offering of our What's Next series. And I got a chance to meet with the presenter that we're going to be working with. And it just is really going to be an innovative, interactive time for us together on Monday. And our conversation on Monday is remembering yourself as the sacred creator. And we're going to be joined by an artist, Ali Marketich, who is out of North Carolina. And I promise you on Monday is going to be a beautiful conversation. So we look forward to that. And then for next Thursday, we'll be back for our regularly scheduled Nurture the Soul, the second part of the 3-part series, where we're going to continue to learn from Erica and Dee-Dee. And we're going to be guided by the questions of how do we support our loved ones without enabling their drug use. And then we're going to take a deep dive into the many options that families have today beyond traditional intervention that not only is rarely effective, but has long-lasting negative impact. So we look forward to seeing you on Monday and seeing you on Tuesday. What a great opportunity to be here with you all. Blessings, blessings, blessings. And I want to send you, out with a benediction, if I may, right, beloveds? This has been an interesting week, as in all of the weeks have been interesting weeks. And I want to invite you to settle in however it is that you find yourself physically at this moment. paying attention to your surroundings, paying attention to what it is that you feel in your body, and then calling out to our beloved Creator. Be with our community as we mourn the loss of children, as we mourn the loss of people in our world who push us to think and to do things differently. We mourn the loss of our just ability to be loving. We mourn the loss for us to see the humanity and the God in all of your creation, oh beloved. Please be with us. Let us be a sponge of love, a sponge of curiosity, a sponge of the things that will help our world flourish. Let us be the hands and feet of Jesus now and forevermore. In your many names we pray. Amen. Bye, beloveds. Thank you.
Siblings in Christ, if you are moved by this conversation, if what's been offered here has helped enhance your ministry or has nurtured your soul for the journey, please consider donating to the annual fund of the United Church of Christ by texting UCC to 41444. Your support will help to provide programs like this, which are an essential part of our ministries in the United Church of Christ. Thank you for your support. Be blessed on your journey and know that you are not alone. We are holding you in prayer. Amen.